All right, everyone, welcome, welcome. My name is Shirley Verico, and I am the Curator, Director of Visual Arts here at Buffalo Art Studio. And I want to thank you, those who are here in person and those who will be watching this online. We are really excited to present this panel conversation. I want to thank all of our participants, and I will introduce you very briefly. I also want to thank Humanities New York, which is the major funder of this large project that involves a partnership with Buffalo Art Studio and El Bate. It is started out with a mask demonstration in Bomba at El Bate. It then, we have this wonderful exhibition here. We had a great opening reception. Now we're having our conversation tonight, and then there's a community forum tomorrow. And then we are ending all the programming with a demonstration by the artists and a bomba performance here at Buffalo Art Studio on June 15th. So this is a lot. It's really exciting. And it is a time where the weather's beautiful in Buffalo after yet another long, hard winter. So thank you all for coming out. And this idea came to Beatriz and myself and Ama Correa, our executive director, when we were talking about presenting these Vegante masks and this tradition, this idea of folk tradition, and bringing it into a gallery and really thinking about how rarely that happens and what are some of the barriers that keep this kind of project from happening more often. We know that there are vibrant traditions throughout our community. There are diasporic communities here in Western New York. Why are we not seeing more of this? So that was really the framework for this project. I'm going to start with a quick introduction of each of our participants. And I have created a few questions, but I'm going to let the conversation sort of flow organically. And for those of you that are watching it online, we are, before we post it, going to put a lot of links. So if we reference something, even those of you that are here, if you want to go back and check out those links, we are going to link the bios for all of our participants. And then after, as I said, as the conversation goes on, we are going to ask our experts here if they have references they would like to share with us. So we're hoping that this is going to be a very dynamic experience when it's online, as well as this evening. So I want to begin, of course my paper's upside down, with our panel. We have first, and you can just do a little quick wave, Beatriz Flores, and she is the founder and executive director of El Bate Puerto Rican Cultural Center. Full bios will be on the website. I'm not going to read them all now. We do have papers. Did we hand out the sheets so those of you that are here can read those as well? And really, Beatriz, this was her idea, her brilliant, beautiful idea. And she came to us about a year ago, and we were able to realize not simply an exhibition, but a cultural exchange, a set of conversations, and all of it rooted in this tradition from Loíza, Puerto Rico. We also have our two artists from Multinational Illumination Art. We have Deborah Canales. Wave for the... I know who you are, but they don't. And then we have Benjamin Sorino. And they are artists who were born in Puerto Rico, in Loíza, but have been living here, I don't want to give away anybody's age, but about 20 years? 10? 10 years, okay. And Stephanie Hernandez, correct? Fernandez, I'm like, oh, I didn't write her name down, is our interpreter, and she's been a valuable part of this entire process, and we are so grateful, and we feel like we've made a real friend, too, that's come along in the organization. We also have Dr. Maricruz Rivera Clemente, who is an Afro-Puerto Rican activist, social worker, sociologist, and graduate of the University of Puerto Rico. And Alma's our executive director, met her last summer, correct, when you were here? And her interests were so aligned with the project. When we wrote the grant, we requested funding to bring her here to Buffalo again from Puerto Rico, so that's very exciting. We're happy to have her. And last, we have Dr. Dalia Antonia Caraballo Mueller. I'm Italian, so did I put the emphasis on the right syllable? Caraballo, okay. And she's an associate professor of Latin American and Caribbean history at the University of Buffalo. And again, another expert that we wanted to bring in to talk about diaspora and Caribbean traditions regarding especially folk art, but as that pertains to literature, not simply to the visual arts. Lastly, we have an artist who will be coming in who is a transnational artist. Her name is Jody Lynn Maracle. And my guess is, she did message me that she was late. She is transnational in a very literal sense. She comes across the Canadian border regularly, and sometimes it goes smoothly, and other times it does not. And I believe that's probably what's happening this evening. So thank you all for coming. And I wanted to begin, and I'm going to let Stephanie translate after I did all that talking. I wanted to start with Beatriz and just have her kind of introduce, how did you come up with this crazy, wonderful cookie idea to bring us all together?
Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. See, I'm so loud. So I think the idea behind it is I always think that art and artists are drivers and the front lines of social change. I believe that wholeheartedly. Okay. So the concept was because personally, for us, for folk artists like Benjamin, like Deborah, our art is always tied to a larger social issue. It doesn't separate, it doesn't exist in a vacuum because of our identities, right? And because of that too, I think it transcends the aesthetic value of it. Okay. Voy a hacerlo así. Okay. So in that context, I think for us, art, social change, activism, all are kind of intertwined. You cannot separate it. But it also speaks to, hang on, I want to do a point that I do not want to forget. It speaks to the fact that as artists, we're in the business of preservation, and we stand juxtaposed to colonialism and all that involves. So for us, art has a different value, it has a different meaning. It holds so much more than just the looks of the mask. It has a history. But it also, I think, in the topic of speaking of art driving social change, it forces us to think and ask why. Like in the broader spectrum, we think art itself, it's tied to the identity. So if we think in the broader spectrum for us as diaspora, it forces us to ask, why does Benjamin and Deborah are in Buffalo and they find themselves, like we titled, the 1,800 miles away from home? Why is that? Why is it that in Puerto Rico there's 3 million Puerto Ricans, and then in the diaspora outside of Puerto Rico there's double that amount? So Puerto Rico has a large diaspora, but it's not by chance, it's displacement, it's land grab. So their art puts that to the forefront immediately. Then if we bring it to the forefront, like here, locally, I was trying to figure out, how does it impact this land fabric? How does it impact the art scene? And it makes you question, why is it that, again, folk artists like himself, like myself, like Maricruz, the work that we do, why is it not the norm? Why is it in a city, they've been here 10 years, and just now they found a space with you guys at Buffalo Art Studios, in a city that has kind of like marketed itself as a cultural hub, as an art center. Like it houses one of the largest museums, world-renowned museums. Buffalo does. And then we have artists in the margins. They find themselves in the margins of the art scene in Buffalo. Why is that? So, it really, this project, not all is lost. The fact that we're here, artists like you as a curator, crossing paths with her, with Maricruz, with Benjamin, us coming together to actually bring forth not only the art, but the history that comes behind it, all of that, all of the narratives, the stories that are lost in between. So this project actually drives social change in itself, and it's actually impacting the landscape of the art. And then who determines what holds value in the art scene? So this is major to me. I mean, that was the driver behind it. The fact that I brought it to Alma, I brought it to Shirley, and they saw the value that I saw in it as well. So that's why, in that long of a speech, that's why that was the idea behind and the concept behind the 1849 al otro lado del charco.
Jody, she did make it here, and as we said that you are truly transnational, you have to deal with that wonderful border and all of those other issues. And I think it's really interesting what you just said about preservation, and the idea that came to my mind when you were talking about displacement, and when we're talking about art, especially visual art, is erasure. So as you're saying, you know, why we aren't seeing traditional or folk traditions, you know, it is about this physical displacement that creates diaspora. But you also, for me, what my mind goes to is this relegation of visual representation and how that contributes to erasure. So that really resonated with me. The next question I wanted to talk a little bit about, so we have this wonderful tradition here, and I know that I did a lot of research. Well, I shouldn't say that. It was difficult. I tried to do some research. We did some academic research. And so I wanted to turn this to Mara Cruz and ask a little bit about, from your position as someone who lives and works in Loíza, if you can speak a little bit about the Viajante mask tradition.
Buenas tardes, ¿me escuchan bien?
Are you guys listening?
No me entienden bien, pero me escuchan bien.
Are you guys listening to me? Are you guys-
Conectando un poco la pregunta hacia mí con los comentarios importantes que hace Beatriz.
no. Connecting the question, the question and connecting with I'm unifying with what Beatriz is saying.
La manera en que se construye en los espacios conquistados, partiendo de, para nosotros en la historia, de 1492.
So building this from the 1400s,
se establece una medición o una forma de discriminar o de formar lo que es el concepto sociedad de un nuevo espacio, digamos lo que se llama las Américas, ¿verdad? Pero tenía sus nombres originarios también, el Abayala.
okay, from the 1400 it is established what is the social, the colonization of, you mean? Tú dices Puerto Rico como tal, ¿no?
Las Américas.
Just Americas, the colonization of the America, the establishing of the social concept of Americas.
Tenemos una nueva sociedad, ¿verdad? Una nueva definición y lo que se construye como raza.
And what it comes to establishing the Americas and what we do and how we establish the races.
Occidente, o lo que llamamos Europa, y la Nueva América en tierras estadounidenses, dan las categorías de raza y también la cuestión cultural está involucrada en estos espacios, ¿verdad? En lo que se construye como raza, en el caso de Puerto Rico, y no separo a Puerto Rico de las Américas, porque lo que está hablando Beatriz de la situación de no tener unos espacios en lo que construyeron otros para el arte, no solamente se relega a la diáspora, eso pasa también en nuestros países. Así que la división de lo que es arte para las clases privilegiadas en Puerto Rico, como tal vez lo es para las clases privilegiadas en México o en Argentina o en cualquier lugar de las Américas, significa que el arte que algunos llaman folclore, y yo me niego a llamarle folclore, es un arte que viene de la tradición. She can try.
I'm gonna I'm sorry if I'm too loud. Hold on. There you go. I'm gonna let Beatriz translate that since she's more familiar with the terminology of it. So I apologize.
So I think, pendiente. Maricruz is speaking about to contextualize how the Americas were transformed and how it became a new world, counter juxtaposed to Europe, right? And then in those spaces, that idea, the racialization of the people came to be. And then the art spaces too, she talked about that when I brought it up on talking about the diaspora and what we face as a diaspora people, they also face that in Puerto Rico as well, in the Americas. The elite art spaces, that's an issue too as well in the new America because of the context of colonization.
Correcto. Okay. Así que se mira también a partir de 1950 cómo en Puerto Rico, pero también se da esta misma manifestación a través de los organismos internacionales y de poder, cómo se empieza a folclorizar el arte que se da, lo que llaman algunos arte popular. Cómo entonces esas máscaras de Vejigante, y por eso digo voy a conectar, no está desligada de la pregunta que se le hace a Beatriz, cómo esa tradición del Vejigante, que podemos pensar desde Loíza, que es una conexión directa con la parte africana de nuestra cultura, entonces se demoniza. ¿Cómo se empieza a construir que todo lo que viene del África, que lo que no viene de Europa o que no viene de los Estados Unidos anglosajones es menos? Y ese folclore que llaman algunos, o mira, esas máscaras de Vejigante, que eso es el demonio, eso es el diablo, representan de hecho en la tradición de Puerto Rico, como que es y en la de Loíza, ¿verdad? Se nos hizo creer por mucho tiempo que el Vejigante es el diablo. De hecho, no solamente en Puerto Rico, por eso no quiero desligar el tema del Vejigante, solamente ligarlo a Puerto Rico. Si vamos a Venezuela, si vamos a República Dominicana, si vamos a espacios negros donde existen máscaras similares, también se les conoce como los diablitos. ¿Por qué eso es malo? Perdón. Fui suave. Fui suave.
I'm taking notes.
Somebody help me.
Sorry.
So Maricruz is making a connection. She wants to make sure that you guys contextualize, how the Americas came to be, how Afrocentric spaces are impacted by this colonization, how Afrocentric traditions like the Vejigante Mass are kind of whitewashed, and because of the church and religion, it gets folklorized. And then it gets the European aspect of it gets superimposed into these African traditions. And she doesn't want to relegate it to just Puerto Rico. She knows for a fact that happens in any black space, anywhere, wherever black people are in the Americas, in Cuba, in Santo Domingo, in Peru, donde sea, donde haya gente negra bella, this happens.
Así que esa construcción es importante porque el arte, para mí, si no tiene cultura, pues para mí se devalúa. Entonces, se construye el arte desde los intereses de alguna gente, desde los intereses económicos, desde lo que el Estado financia para decir que es arte, versus salud, versus el trabajo que hace nuestra gente en las comunidades y en los espacios. Y no se financia de la misma manera y no se expone tampoco de la misma forma.
She speaks about how the folkloric art well, the first thing she said is an important quote, I don't want to forget it. She mentioned that art divorced from culture has no value. And what happens is that when it gets interrupted or it gets tampered with because of higher powers or the destructive powers that there are, it loses its value. And that's when we come and see that it's not displayed as much as other things that are considered fine art. It's not valued, it's not taken care of, it's not practiced. It's not funded, yes. It's not funded, or yeah, they don't hold space for it at all. Yeah.
Así que llegando a la historia de Loíza, particularmente con el Vejigante y las fiestas y las tradiciones, el Vejigante es la máscara, bueno, también la loca. En Loíza hay 4 máscaras tradicionales, pero está en el viejo, la máscara y la loca, esa participación pueblerina, esa participación negra de resistencia. Y aunque las fiestas tradicionales, hay 2 fiestas en Loíza, lo que son las fiestas patronales, que son las avaladas por la Iglesia Católica, y la fiesta de Santiago Apóstol es una fiesta tradicional. Así que es una fiesta que, aunque pues se relega a la parte por ser un santo, ¿verdad? San James, sigue siendo una fiesta más tomada por el pueblo. So you want me to say no?
Oh, you speak English, huh? Espérate. You're making me do all this work. She brought it all the way from, the beginnings of time to Loíza and the traditional fiestas that are celebrated. There's 2 in Loíza, the fiestas patronales, which are kind of common across the island, the patrons, every town has one, and then la fiesta de San James, right? They're traditional ones. And then in those fiestas, they have different characters, not just the Vejigante, la loca, the viejito, the old guy, the crazy lady, and the Vejigante. So those are common, and even though they were kind of superimposed by the Catholic Church, and then they're related to the saints and whatnot, it has been a fiesta or a town gathering that the people kind of reclaimed.
Can you speak a little bit about reclaiming the Vejigante character from being sort of the criminal or the mischief to being a symbol of empowerment and reclamation?
El trabajo que hace la resistencia es resignificar ese símbolo, el simbolismo que lo oficial convirtió. Así que desde la decolonialidad, los espacios de resistencia se han convertido en dado un nuevo lenguaje y una nueva imagen y una nueva estética. Así que yo creo que desde eso que hablamos, desde esa imposición y manera hegemónica de llevar la cultura y decir desde el poder lo que es bueno y lo que es malo, lo que es feo y lo que es bonito, lo que es arte y lo que es no arte, los artistas y la gente que se manifiesta a través del Vejigante le da un significado muy distinto y poderoso. Así que esa africanidad que le quiso demonizar la oficialidad y la historia hegemónica y el poder hegemónico en Puerto Rico, el pueblo lo convirtió en un personaje de resistencia.
So she mentions that the character itself, even though it was demonized, and anything that was related to Africa and African heritage was demonized and looked as the bad guy, the people itself have reclaimed the character, and the artists are in the front lines pushing the change of the character into the local hero, and something to be celebrated and tied to the culture of the town and the people.
transition with that to the artists. I think it's a good time. So one of the questions that I had asked of Deborah and Benjamin, where in Louisa would one see the mass? I know there's the festival, but outside of the festival, if you can speak a little bit about that, where would one in Louisa see them? Where did you see them?
Ok, ellos están preguntando, ¿dónde en Loíza ustedes exhibirían este tipo de arte gigante? Ya se sabe que se hacen en las fiestas patronales, fiestas tradicionales, pero ¿dónde más se exhibiría este tipo de arte, como los gigantes?
Bueno, ¿qué te podré decir? Naturalmente, cuando se hacían este tipo de arte, naturalmente se esperaba las fiestas patronales. Nuestro maestro decía, bueno, llegaba la hora de talla, pues ahí comenzábamos nosotros a hacer las tallas y traditaban a las máscaras de Estados Unidos. Y la que hacía el museo quisiera adoptar como una obra exquisita, una obra llamativa, pues entonces ellos mismos pues la tomaban.
Okay, so aside from the festivals, when it comes to the festivals, town festivals, it's time to create. We will create and we will showcase at the festival, but also museums or other places will come and they will, if they find that there's something that it will get their attention, they will come and purchase and they will showcase in those different museums.
And then, we talked about this being a tradition. Can you speak a little bit about the way you as artists have added personal or contemporary themes? And I have been living with this artwork for a year, so I kind of know the answer, but I would like to hear you speak about where your personal or your contemporary experience has shaped the objects.
¿Cómo ustedes han podido, además, ¿verdad?, de presentar lo que es el arte del gigante, cómo ustedes han podido personalizarlas a su manera, cómo ustedes le han añadido esa modernización o para hacerla más contemporánea y personalizada?
Bueno, en la cultura, en la tradición, lo que nos enseñó nuestro maestro Orlando Tomasini, siempre había una máscara de ojo, nariz triangular y boca. Entonces, pues nosotros en sí, pues quisimos romper ese patrón y comenzar a hacer cosas distintas.
Okay, so we have a mentor, Orlando Tomas, that mentored us through our journey or our career, and typically the gigante mask will have the two eyes, the nose, and the mouth. But we wanted to break that traditional and we wanted to elevate it to the next level.
Pues, a decir verdad, yo quise darle un giro y solamente depositar una semilla, algo diferente, llamativo al ojo del hombre, y pues para mí fue arte, sencillamente.
So I want to make something different, so something that will caught people's eye, that will get their attention. So I started just making things different in a different and traditional way.
And I think while we're talking about the artists, I did want to introduce Jody, who came in, and she is born and raised. She was in Buffalo, and she has a Mohawk parent, an artist, a teacher, and a language advocate. And Jody was part of a wonderful exhibition here at Buffalo Art Studio, and that was why I invited her to be a part of this. And Jody is a contemporary artist, as all of these artists are, who works with media, but she also incorporates traditions. And I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit about that. And I know for me what was really interesting was how actively you had to pursue learning some of these traditions.
Yeah, so I'm actually, one of my big things that I've been doing for the past 10 years is like learning how to traditionally brain tan deer hides the way that we as Haudenosaunee people did, not only as like a pet project of moving away from like just purchasing like commercially tanned hides. But for us, our act of making is our enactment of our responsibility to creation and to place and to land, and is like our material culture is an act of ceremony for us. So for me, when I set out to learn how to utilize like our corn husks or our deer hides or things like this, it wasn't simply to maybe try to perform some notion of what is the most like traditional kind of Haudenosaunee representation of who we are, but it was more about what does this look like as a personal practice within that. But that being said, somebody mentioned like if something's considered folkloric or true traditional, there's no funding in it, right? There's no backing for that. And so for 10 years, it was like using like my food stamps to like purchase things to be able to like push this project forward. And it's only this past year that I've actually had some meaningful funding to be able to kind of run these hide camps and how to process them, and not only how to get like a soft deer hide, but how to create like rawhide sculptural elements within that, right? So just thinking about, your question was like kind of around how we're not born knowing these things anymore, and we don't have that community to build it up. So I'm just really grateful to be able to be making a community, to not only to have this knowledge and to have this relationship to these things again.
And I think it goes back to what we were saying about fighting erasure, about rebuilding and reclaiming history and practice, and then moving it into spaces and something that's, as we've talked about, we believe too in the power of art to affect change, and art is an active means to pursue a just society. So that's important to us, and Jodi's work was very, very powerful, and we were glad to have it here, but I did see the toll it took on you to make that work. It was very demanding physically, it was very demanding emotionally, and I thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing with us today. So, we've talked about Afro traditions, Afro-Caribbean traditions, and I think what we see consistently, again, back to that idea of erasure of indigenous populations in this colonial model of Euro-Americanizing, for a word I think I just made up. So I'm going to go to Dalia, who also has studied, and she's looking at Afro-Caribbean traditions, but coming more from Cuba. And maybe speaking to some of these themes that we've been addressing and how you've seen that in your work.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Gosh, I'm going to try to be concise. I have so many things to say. And as I've been listening to the different panelists, I've been sort of madly typing notes. Yeah. And sort of trying to edit down my thoughts. Also, Beatriz graced us with a very, very large set of questions. About 50 of them. So, so that got me really excited. So I'm going to try to do as best I can. One of the things that has struck me, forgive me if I, seems like, okay. That sounds pretty loud to me. Oh, okay. Oh, it's a question of the angle. It's the angle. All right, I'm gonna start singing now. No, yeah. So forgive me. I promise I will come around to your question. But I just want to say on where Beatriz started us out with the question of folk art and activism. One of the questions that she asked me, and I was thinking about my role here as somebody coming from the academy specifically, where folk art is, and today still remains, pretty undervalued. And so we see within the academy, of course, these artistic traditions, when they do show up within the context of anthropology specifically, museum studies, et cetera, right? We can see the replication of the same power relations, colonial relations, et cetera. The same violences are being done over and over. So part of what I thought I might be able to bring to the table was two actual references of scholars that I've found and who I respect in the way in which they engage with folk art within the academy, right, which is a very difficult dance or balance. So I just wanted to mention two. One is she does study Cuba. Her name is Solimar Otero, and I have a book of hers here that's called Theorizing Folklore from the Margins. And and she has another one called Conjuring the Archives. So we'll definitely get those on the list. But what's really interesting about her is that she is she works in a folklore department. She's a folklorist, but she's also a practitioner and a member of the communities that she studies. And she doesn't shy away from blurring the line, as she is a priestess, et cetera, right? And even in her work, she pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable within the academy by, for example, honoring the voices and experiences of ghosts as legitimate sources for the reconstruction of the traditions, the history, and the stories that she's telling. So in thinking of spirit possession and the media, right, so she works with people in her community who have these experiences and who are spoken to by ancestors, then those figures become legitimate sources for the telling of the past and the reconstruction of these stories, right? And she gets a lot of flack in the academy for this kind of work, right? Folks think she's crazy. But she has been an enduring inspiration to me. So I wanted to bring her up, and she works within Afro-Cuban religions in Cuba principally. The other one is a gentleman who was a scholar here in the history department at UB, who wrote an article on the flying Africans, the sort of tradition, the folkloric stories of the African enslaved or even post-emancipation who would fly home to Africa. And he wrote this article where he endeavored to honor those stories as true, right? He could never, it took him like 3 years to get it published. He ended up getting it published in the Journal of Africana Religions. But one of the things that he shared with me was one of the critiques that he got from a fellow scholar was, this is really great work, et cetera. However, even Africans are subject to the laws of physics, right? And that was the critique of a fellow colleague reviewing the piece, clearly suggesting that he missed the point entirely, right? But he shared with me again the fact that he kept going from journal to journal, could never get this published, right? So I feel that those scholars within the academy that recognize the continued ongoing violences, but position themselves radically against that, even when it means taking hits to their career or their publication or what have you, right? I feel that that's, for me, and it may be a strong statement, but maybe the only legitimate way to actually honor this work and this art and this sort of quote, source from within the space of the academy, which is a space of power and violence. So I didn't answer the question about my own work, and maybe there'll be a moment later. I don't want to take up too much time in each moment, but I felt like, again, I was very conscious about my position here as a representative of coming from the academy, and so I thought sharing those two stories would be of value to the conversation.
I think that's really interesting, that certain narratives are completely disregarded without acknowledging that the vast majority of what we're reading at any given moment is narrative, right? Like it's this idea, this hierarchy, it's built into every aspect. It's interesting to me. It's also interesting to me when we asked about where these items are viewed or are placed within Puerto Rico or here locally. We think a lot about collections and the way they are presented. And I know I come back to this idea again of erasure and violence, that when we see objects that are labeled as craft or folkloric, they're oftentimes presented in museums as in museums of the past. And one of the things that's been really important to us is to use that term contemporary, to talk about contemporary artists making contemporary art. Would any of you, I mean, I know Jody as an artist, but would any of you like to speak to that? I know also for you with your bomba. I mean, this is contemporary art. You know, as we like to say when I give tours, you know, too often we teach young people that artists are old dead white guys. And there are people making art around us all the time. And so would any of you, you know, like to speak to that idea of contemporary art? And that, rather than this hierarchical notion of folk, craft, etc. But y'all are alive. You're all making art now. So speak to that.
Two things come to mind. I think to what Dalia said of the academic space, the elite space, it makes me think to a pivot that I want to make personally is, and I mean, I've been intentional about it, but I feel like I have to be more aggressive towards not trying to bring what we value, our history, our culture, our traditions, our art, our expressions into spaces that were not meant for them. Because then that's devaluing it as well. To us actually shift the paradigm and decide what holds value and then create those spaces. So that's one shift that I want to make, because trying to prove someone that something is valuable when they are dead set on not valuing it, it's futile and it's nonsense, and it's energy wasted. So that's one thing that, you know, like, thank you for sharing that, because it made me even, you know, kind of like hone in on get rooted in even creating more spaces for us. As far as contemporary art, I do believe that folk art is contemporary. I mean, it literally holds a mirror to society as to what is happening in the lives of Puerto Rican people, Black people, communities that are marginalized. And then I also think that the word folk, you know, I drive it to like people. It's people. It's history. It's us. But it's not just the past. It's an active form of resistance. And I know I'm going to catch a lot of stuff for it, but I'm going to say it. I think Bad Bunny is a prime example because as controversial as he might be, the fact that, you know, it's reggaeton, it's you know, it's a little raunchy. No me mates. I use him as an example because he is unapologetically becoming a cultural icon. And he does it with the dialect of Puerto Rico. He doesn't translate it. He speaks to the people. He's maintaining the identity, the Puerto Rican identity as is, and then take it as we are. And that's kind of like a framework that he's setting for artists that think that they have to assimilate, that think that they have to change, and especially for us, for folk artists, that think that we have to adjust to fit into spaces. And he's doing that contemporarily right now, but he's acting as a folk ambassador because he's preserving our culture, our identity, our Caribbean, you know, the nuances about being Puerto Rico. He's speaking on larger issues. He's connecting all those things to his art. So he's a folk artist, a contemporary folk artist in my eyes. It's an example of that. And Bomba, you can speak more about Bomba. I'm gonna let Maricruz take the mic.
Bueno, el espacio, como dice Beatriz, tanto acá con el ejemplo del Batey y lo que hacemos en Piñones, en Copi, por 25 años de trabajo de resistencia, pero también de crear nuestros propios espacios, porque si no cabemos en un lugar, porque hay que forzar estar ahí. Así que para nosotros hacer nuestros propios espacios, hablar de nuestro arte, hablar con nuestros artistas y producir, hablar de nuestra gente, por nosotros mismos, nuestra propia voz. Eso definitivamente es un acto de pura resistencia que hoy en día ahora mucha gente pues lo puede practicar con un poco de más conciencia y libertad y pues depende de la época. Nosotros viviendo en la colonia de los Estados Unidos, pues cuando acá dicen algunos, si acá estornudan, a nosotros nos da gripe, ¿verdad? Pero si surgen dineros como ahora han surgido con el tema y todo el issue de Black Lives Matter, es el efecto económico que se va a ir en algún momento, no va a estar eterno, ha resultado que los museos en Puerto Rico que no hablaban de negros, ahora resulta que son los más interesados en el tema de la negritud.
Me and her, like we're soul sisters, twin soul. En cuestión de hablar, just that. So she mentioned that yes, she agrees with what I said, that not to force our art and our culture into spaces. But then she also mentioned, espérate que se me fue el hilo. Oh yes. So she's also mentioned that now the impact that she's seen in the folk art and the bringing forth the Black identity in Puerto Rico, there's funding that has come with that, and that in part has to do with the Black Lives Matter movement. That because we are we're so connected to the United States under the context of colonialism, because we are a colony of the United States. They say in the town that if the United States catches a cold, we catch pneumonia, because we are connected, but we're like So because of that, because of the social movements that are happening in the United States, Puerto Ricans, Black Puerto Ricans, are seeing kind of like an impact on it, where museums in Puerto Rico would never hold spaces for Black artists or Black art are now doing that. And she knows that, she recognizes that the funding is there, the money is there, that it may not be there once it's no longer, in style to be, the spaces of equity and the whole wave. I'm rambling. Okay.
Deborah wants to say something.
Bueno,
She's a little shy.
a pesar de que es un arte antiguo, nosotros le hemos implementado lo que son luces, lo que es resina, lo que es sacarlo en estilo lámpara, cosa que no se había visto antes.
So although we're talking about the contemporary, although this is an old art, we have modernized in making it by putting lights, using compost, resin. Is it resin and compost? Okay, resin. Sorry, and making it into some sort of lamp, so we can make it relevant to today, to this day.
Como también es bueno que se le enseñe a la nueva generación que no se pierda este tipo de arte.
So we don't want to, we are showing case to the new population and the youth, and to not lose this type of art.
Y que también cuando ellos, la nueva generación que comience a aprender lo que es el tallado, ellos pueden dejar volar su imaginación y pueden crear más cosas.
So we want to show the new generation that they can create and they can use their own imagination into building up something new. I just want to say that.
Can you speak a little bit about the workshop? Because I know you're doing that too, Julie. Talk a little bit, and then about training, right? Training the youth. So you talk about the workshop you did.
You want to talk about the one that we did or the one upcoming? Oh yeah, that was a riot. Ella quiere hablar del taller. ¿Quieres decir unas cosas del taller o quiere que yo lo diga? Sí.
She's asking if these masks are all made out of coconut.
Yeah. This is purist. Like, don't play with the Loíza traditions. But it's beautiful because it brings to the point that it's made out of coconut husk, like the traditional way, but it has all these new elements that brings it to like a new era. I absolutely love those masks. Yo soy loca con ella. So yes, we did a really fun workshop at El Bate with them too. They led the workshop, and we were trying to figure out what was the best way to have the kids or the youth and the families that participated to get the sense of ¿cómo se dice tallar en inglés? How do you say carving? To get the sense, to get the sense of carving. The one that don't speak English. He's giving me translation words. So we wanted the kids to get a sense of carving, but obviously doing coconuts and shipping them from Puerto Rico or Florida maybe. We don't want anything from Florida. But from Puerto Rico, we decided to go with soaps, bars of soaps, and then have tools that were similar to the carving tools. And we had a blast. The kids had got to actually build the face of the Gigante with a model that they did. They were like at the tables guiding them, letting them all know how to carve it. After they were carved, we just put a few sticks, I think it was like toothpicks, that resemble the sticks, and then the kids got to paint it in whatever color they wanted. So some did a Palestine one, some did a Loíza team one, they did different, from the towns that they were from, like from Ponce, from San Juan, they did different things. It was super creative, super open, but they got the sense of what it felt like. It's a lot, carving, it's a lot of work. And it was on a soap, so you can imagine on a coconut husk. It was a mess. Yeah, oh yes. We were, I was still sweeping the other day. I was finding I said, oh my God, what in the world? Dime. Sí, they were adults too, that's true.
Sí, todo muy diferente, todo era muy diferente. Yo me quedé prácticamente frisado y dije, pero es que no es lo mismo. Esto es un coco, eso es un jabón. ¿Cómo yo le voy a dar una instrucción a una persona? Pero sí, en el tiempo de antes, como decía Débora, pues se mostraba todos estos tipos de artes diferentes, se hacían competencias. Pero cuando comencé a tallar, yo veía a todo el mundo de mis compañeros hacerse más que solamente la misma rutina, la misma rutina, la misma rutina. Y yo pues entonces le dije a mi maestro, ¿se podría hacer cualquier otro tipo de máscara? No, sencillamente seguir el patrón. Hasta que llegó un momento y dije, pero ¿por qué si yo puedo hacerlo yo mismo? Cuando comencé a hacer máscaras diferentes, comenzaron a burlarse de mí y comenzaron a los monstruos del apocalipsis, le decían.
That's interesting what he's saying, because he's talking about, ya yo empecé a hablar. I just took over because I'm so excited about what he said, because it's so important coming from him. He's the one that's having the experience. He was faced with, when we were doing the workshop at the center, he's like, oh my God, it's so different from how I learned, and doing it on a bar of soap and doing it against a coconut husk. But it also reminded him that when he was being trained in the craft, it was very monotonous, it was very rigid. This is the traditional way, you don't deviate from doing the masks the way they are. And he asked the teacher, his mentor, can I try something new? Can I do a different face? And they were like, no, don't quite go there, keep the tradition. But he pushed the envelope and created different faces. And he was ridiculed for a while as an artist because he was outside of the traditional lines. And they were calling the masks, oh, they're like scary, they're monsters. But in a sense, he was pushing that envelope, and it goes back to what Deborah said, that she wanted to teach the youth, but not only to have them do the traditional, to give them the freedom to build upon that tradition and then take the art even further.
Con-
I'm mostly around my 3 very loud kids. No, but we have a tradition of mask making as well, and it's used ceremonially, but it's interesting because we have 2 different types of masks, and one is carved from living trees, and another you have to do this really intricate process with the corn husk, but you are not allowed to deviate from the masks that exist and the characters that they represent unless you dream it, which is really interesting to me because it like just places this power of trust in that like you're an honest person and it's coming from a place other than your own kind of desire to craft something new or to differentiate yourself. And so I'm just like really thinking about what you were all saying just has me thinking about just kind of like the way that traditions or new forms in a certain medium that's considered like folkloric or sacred or rigid can be moved forward in different ways. So that's where my head was at, and I don't remember what you asked me. Sorry, I was just like so excited just thinking about, because I'm like, I think that like I am very siloed in like my Haudenosaunee-ness, like I like live in community and I teach at an immersion school, and like my daughter's school is like on the land learning traditions day in and day out like in Mohawk language, and it's like I forget that there is this connection across the Americas of these traditions and even across continents and geographies that I think is like a very grounding human experience that too often I think because of colonization, because of academy, because of funding sources just becomes like, you need to be doing this tradition, you need to be doing this tradition, you need to like really hyper identify yourself in a certain source and not deviate too much from it, or else even within your own community you're kind of like kicked to the wayside, or you're ridiculed, or somebody won't sign off on something saying that like, yes, you are a master of this craft, right? So I'm just really sitting excitedly in that tension, right? Because that's also a lot of like, you know, even working with youth, that's what you said, that's what your question was. One of the things around high tanning in many communities is that it's like a hyper, not just for Haudenosaunee people, it's a hyper gendered practice. A lot of our practices are nowadays considered gendered practices versus like the practicality of who was staying in the village and who was going off doing stuff most of the time. And so one of the camps that I've been involved with for now, I think we're in our 5th year, and we move between 3 different communities, is it's Nijmenaduk, and it's for different, it's not just for Haudenosaunee youth, but it's for queer Two-Spirit youth who in particular have a really hard time accessing any capital T traditional craft because they're not fitting within these gendered norms of who should be allowed to do these things, of who should be allowed to kind of pick up these responsibilities, of who should be allowed to pass these on, you know, within their own generation, in their own families, in their own communities. And it's just, I think that that's where a lot of my really enriching work has been, because it's like, you know, a queer person who just like was like flying under the radar hardcore just to like learn the language and go to ceremony. It's been really refreshing to like see those spaces being made, you know, as I'm like sitting in middle age, statistically speaking, middle age, and seeing youth have a space over the course of 2 weeks to be able to own their indigeneity, their cultural specificity, picking up these crafts and forms and these stories that go along with them, and then also pushing them forward and not having to sacrifice their queerness in addition to that. So that's the stuff I was thinking about listening to you all.
I'm holding my heart. I'm like, because the parallels are insane. Like my mind is like going a million miles an hour, because even in Bomba, at least from my experience and from what I know, it was, or it is, a very patriarchal tradition. And then for El Bate and the work that we do here in Buffalo, because it's such a traditional like space, culture, you know, family oriented, I think I'm very open, very in solidarity with the queer community, and my queer kids and my younger kids. They're welcome. We made the space for them. But listening to her puts me in high alert that I have to do more, because we have to be able to marry those things, you know, like the traditional, you belong, a truly belonging type of space where none of your identity is sacrificed. So her listening to that, just, I'm like, there's so much work to be done still.
I was going to say, yeah, does anybody have a question in the echo? And we're going to have to probably like slow this down for the recording because we have so many fast talkers. Thank you. All right, Jim.
Fantastic. I have an historical question and a contemporary question for Deborah and Benjamin. The historical question, I read someplace, and you alluded to it tonight, that one of the activities of the church with the Behigante masks was to demonize the masks, to scare people into going to church. Is that true?
Stories about the Behigante, and you know, so really I don't know is that true. But I am saying that the Behigante mask comes. It's a lot of history about, you know, the tradition. No, it's not a legenda. The history of our countries that have been created by la imposición y la estética y el lenguaje. ¿Viene quién? ¿Quién dominaba La historia, ¿quién dominaba? La dominaba la iglesia, la dominaba el cristianismo. Y la historia de los moros, ¿verdad? Del cristianismo, imagínense, de antaño, promovía el odio hacia lo no cristiano. Por lo tanto, todo lo que fuese representativo de lo no europeo, tanto los africanos como las poblaciones originarias, había que erradicar ese pensamiento. Y se impuso la iglesia y en cada lugar apareció un santo o apareció una virgen, la virgen de tal, la virgen, así que la construcción de la fe, que fue obligatoria, porque para ser libres, las personas esclavizadas tuvieron que aferrarse obligatoriamente a la fe católica y quitarse su propia fe. Así que esas leyendas o esas historias, yo no tengo evidencia, no hay evidencia de que eso fuese así, pero bueno, hubo muchos mecanismos para alejar a la gente, tanto a la población originaria, taínos en el caso de Puerto Rico, como todos los negros que fueron esclavizados, a pensar que lo nuestro era menos.
Well, the gist of it is that she does not know if it's true or not. But I mean, historically speaking, the Christianity and the Catholic Church was superimposed in enslaved people in the population of Puerto Rico, and I mean, it makes sense that they would create different mechanisms to move people away from anything that was not Christian or Catholic, anything that was like represented any other type of faith outside of the Christian and the Catholic Church. So little stories like that would make sense. Yeah.
Historical part. Just really briefly from the standpoint of Cuban history, so long thinking back to the colonial period, and this is not going to contradict anything that they've said, but these traditions, as linked, say, to like carnival practice, these religious festivals where folks would parade in the streets and bring forth their culture, etc., were complicated in that the church certainly denigrated them, but also under slavery used them as a kind of useful release valve for pressure and tension. So on Sundays, for example, enslaved people would come out into the streets and parade, and they could even masquerade as kings and queens and take donations from people on balconies who would throw little bits of money at them, and they would bring their cultures in full force, music, drums, etc., right? Where some masks like these would be displayed and used in performance. And that was permitted by the church in order to like stave off rebellion, right? So that becomes complicated where it is a moment for, it is a vehicle for preservation and for expression, but it's also co-opted by the church and by structures of power, right? And then just a brief addendum in Cuba, when Cuba ceased to be a Spanish colony, became a U.S., the United States intervened in Cuba, and then Cuba became an independent republic in 1902. Shortly thereafter, everything black was completely criminalized. So arguably, actually, black folks had slightly more freedom of expression under the Spanish colonial state than under the Republican state, because there, as Cuba sought to become a modern country, everything African spoke of barbarism and going backward. And so there were ordinances against playing drums in the street, ordinance against parading. And so that became, it was a huge, huge crackdown and a conscious effort to sort of de-Africanize Cuba, right? And then it flips back and forth in the 1920s, 30s, kind of parallel with the Harlem Renaissance. You get this reviving of Afro-Cubanismo and all of those arts as well, but now also co-opted by the state. So it's this kind of dance, I think, and I wanted to kind of come back to the question of social change and radicalism, right? Because there's this sort of kind of held in tension, this, the ways in which these forms, preserve and enact resistance simply by being enacted, right? But then also there's always this kind of dance with power. And so I have, maybe it's for tomorrow's conversation, but I have a remaining question about how we change, right? The actual social change and what that looks like where are we going, right? One just quick thing is also to say, back to what Jody said, the question of authenticity is something that this scholar I was talking about, Soleiman Otero, talks about a lot within the Caribbean traditions. There is really no authenticity, right? Because the traditions are all hybridized between Spanish, indigenous, different, African peoples and traditions, right? And part of a lot of what her work looks at is trying to think about how we actually let go of seeking that root and that authenticity, but sort of embrace, relationality and, all the ways in which our art can sort of do radical work and sort of radically connect to others and so forth. And that's really inherent in the Caribbean experience because it is so hybridized from the beginning, right? So, sorry, that was a long answer to your historical question, but
That's, and I had a question for the artists.
Y una pregunta para ustedes.
Speaking of the opportunity to reclaim one's own voice and one's own artistic voice and cultural voice. I'm attracted to art initially based on color and shape and texture and so on. And I recognize that some of this has a lot, but it acquires a lot of power for me personally when I understand a bit of the artist's story and their intention for art and what they're trying to, the feelings they're trying to express or the statement they're trying to make. And so, what were some statements you were trying to make with some of these pieces that I may not realize unless you say?
So, originalmente, primordialmente yo estuve fascinado por todo el arte que ustedes han hecho, primeramente por los colores, como es tan colorido, y pues ya que aprendí de este tipo de arte, no te preocupes, me intriga más ¿verdad? El saber la historia de lo que es este arte. I'm sorry, that distracted me. What was your question? Okay.
What were some of the statements,
Yeah.
personal statements they're trying to make?
¿Qué ustedes quieren proyectar a través de lo que está, o comunicar a través del arte que están haciendo, o sea, ya sea los colores, las luces, de alguna de las máscaras que están haciendo?
Bueno, es entretenitivo, primeramente. No es fácil, porque no les voy a decir que es fácil, pero tengo varios proyectos, ya que como hizo mi esposa mención, ¿verdad? No quisiera que se olvidara de algo tan lindo que antes se pasaba las mascaritas, como le decían en Puerto Loíza. Pero nuestra proyección es de enseñar a los niños, y aquí en Estados Unidos pues abrir una escuela, si es posible, de toda clase de talla. Y a la verdad pues, para ser sincero, no tengo mucho que aportar. Los nervios me matan, no me dejan pensar.
Let me help you because you got something to share that is important and we need to know. Tienes que compartir algo que es bien importante. La pregunta era, de las máscaras que tienes aquí, escoge alguna de ellas, ¿qué era lo que tú querías comunicar? ¿Qué querías decir con ciertas máscaras? Como decir, aquella que está allá atrás, que es toda natural, borinquen, ¿qué tú querías comunicar con esa? O decir la que era Hipócritus, que tiene dos caras, ¿qué tú querías comunicar con esas dos?
Es que a decir verdad, yo le mentiría si yo le diría, yo hago esto por este significado. Sencillamente en mi mente vuela el arte. Entonces cuando veo el coco, yo no figuro rápido a buscar internet, no. Sencillamente veo el coco, veo que está medio, si usted, los que han presenciado un coco, ven que está como que desfigurado. Pues ahí mi mente vuela, para ser sincero, en lo que tengo en como arte.
So he mentioned that for the mask, that he doesn't have an agenda to create a specific statement. He looks at the natural way that the coconut is made, and he lets his art and his imagination guide him. So, it could be that he looks at the coconut, and where I, as a normal person, would see just, okay, it's a coconut husk. He sees, you know what I mean? Like, it's not saying much to me, but to him, it basically talks to him, and he sees the form of the face. He sees maybe like the upside down smile that is like, the one mask has like a grin, and you flip it over and it has a smile. So it has that duality to it, and he sees that in the coconut, which the regular eye would not even imagine. So his process is pretty cool. I'm glad he was able to articulate.
Una que otra máscara, sí podría decir que yo mire, vamos a hacer esta, porque hay veces que la gente, pues, de frente es de una manera y a la espalda de otra, perdonando la sinceridad, pues, a veces me dejo llevar por esos tipos de pensamientos, como por ejemplo una llamada hipóquitus. No, que una que otra máscara sí es llevada, y perdóneme, ¿verdad?, por no poder decirle, como le dije, los nervios me matan, pero que una que otra máscara, como por ejemplo, aquella máscara que está atrás, la llamé hipóquitus, porque obviamente uno lo que conoce, las personas que son doble cara, y perdonando la expresión, pues uno se deja llevar por esas trayectorias en pensamiento.
So he also adds to that in the mask making process, he draws reference from, the human experience, people that are hypocrites and have, like the smile in front of you and then a different face behind you. So he also draws reference from just the human experience.
Una cosa que yo he aprendido a observar con los artistas que conozco, de talladores y creadores de máscaras, el coco, ellos dicen lo que el compañero ha estado diciendo, el coco les habla. Y es bien interesante porque obviamente ningún coco es igual, así que cada máscara va a ser muy única. Aunque las pintes igual, aunque trates de hacerle el mismo tallado, la misma forma del coco es distinta. Por lo tanto, la observar ese coco, que no todos los cocos tampoco son aptos para una máscara, pues tiene su magia, ¿verdad? Tiene su lenguaje. Y eso lo he escuchado en casi todos los talladores de máscara.
So Maricruz mentions and kind of agrees with him that because she does run a cultural center in Puerto Rico, she's dealt with a lot of mask making artists as well. She said that that's something that across the board, all mask making artists that deal with the coconut mention that the coconut talks to them and guides them in the production of the mask. That even if you paint it the same way, you make 10 masks, they're all going to have their own uniqueness and their own magic because it's nature and they have different forms.
She also wants to mention that she get inspired. Deborah wants to make sure I get inspired by, in this case, there's a mask that is in the back. It's a green and black mask, and she was inspired by Beatriz, and it's called the Resilient. And sometimes it's just out of inspiration. So there's a lot of inspiration based on current situations or history or other areas, and that's how they will make the mask.
That's beautiful because that mask has the black and white Puerto Rican flag, which is a symbol of resistance for Puerto Rico. And there again, that's an example of art just driving social change and impacting lives.
A decir verdad, otra cosa que quería añadir es que mi esposa me ayuda demasiado. Quiero darle el tributo a las mujeres. A decir verdad, sí. Tiene diversos colores que yo como artista no tengo, por lo cual que yo cuento con ella. No quisiera dejarle, ¿verdad?, y pasar por alto. No es porque sea mi esposa y yo quiero darle porra, pero sí lo tengo que hacer, lo hago y ella lo sabe. Pero que en este caso déjeme decirle que yo mismo como artista me he quedado sorprendido de los diversos colores que tiene en su mente. ¿Sabe? Hacemos un equipo.
So I just wanted to add something of the line. She was telling me, Deborah was telling me that Benjamin on the carving area, and then she will paint and work with the coloring of it. And he's mentioning, Benjamin is mentioning how thankful he is to have such a great support system as his wife alongside, to be able to add that color and make it more even better than what it is by itself. So he feels super complete, and he feels that they make a great team because he carves and she adds the coloring, and he's amazed by all the coloring that she will add to the mask.
Y a decir verdad, el hombre sin la mujer se queda corto.
And a man without his woman, they're no one.
Unless anyone has a question, I kind of like the idea of ending on that note. I do want to thank, did anyone have a question? Thank you all so much for coming. It's always exciting to make new friends, to see old friends, to bring together people that are thinking about how we can change the world that we're living in this moment, and using art as our way. I don't know why I'm getting so much feedback. But once again, thank you to all of our participants. Thank you to everyone that came out. Thank you to the New York State Council on the Arts that gave a Support for Artists folk art grant to our artists, and was a huge facilitator for the making of all of this new work. And thank you to Humanities New York that is allowing us to support all of these brilliant people, and to help fund them for their time, for their energy, for our support, our photographers, for everyone that is helping us both present and document. Because when we're talking about displacement and we're talking about erasure, it is so important that we can document when something wonderful like this is happening, that this work is here, that you all are here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Please join in for conversation. That's one of the best things that happens after we do these talks, is that people can make new friends also and get to know each other, and we do have some snacks. So thank you all very much. And tomorrow, there is a continuation of this conversation focusing more on the activism and community change, and that's happening at El Bate. I don't know what time this will air on our video, but that is Saturday, June 1st, in case somebody's seeing this next week, they don't think it's... So it is Saturday, June 1st. So thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and good night.